Unit 12, Part 1. Unit 12 is on categorical propositions. It's a very big, long chapter with many parts, and they're all very crucial. But let's recap where we are. We started quantifier logic in Unit 10, and we were introduced to singular sentences. Okay, now, as we talked about then, there are many sentences which have subjects and predicates, where the subject is what you're talking about, the subject of your statement, and the predicate is what you're saying of that subject. Okay. Now there are two kinds of subject-predicate statement, and what we were introduced to in Unit 10, when we were introduced to this new predicate logic, or equivalently quantifier logic, what we were introduced to were singular sentences and how to symbolize them and how to analyze them. So if you remember, I started with the argument, all surfers are Australian, Dan is Australian, therefore Dad is a surfer. We went through how we needed this new logic to be able to formally grasp the logical validity, the clear to us all logical validity of this argument. The sentence Dan is Australian, which in our old logic, in our sentential logic, would simply be treated as an atom, be treated as a simple sentence, and would receive for its symbolization simply a capital letter. That is Australian would be symbolized as just D or A, didn't matter what letter, doesn't matter what letter, but just get a capital letter. In this new logic, quantifier logic, singular sentence, Dan is Australian, we broke that up into parts. We learned how to abstract from a singular sentence the propositional function that was obtained by deleting the name, Dan, and replacing it with a variable to get X is Australian. That was the propositional function. And we came to think of the singular sentence, Dan is Australian, as a substitution instance of that propositional function. AX was the propositional function, X is Australian, and the symbolization of Dan is Australian was replacing the individual variable X with the individual constant D, D for Dan. So this would say Dan is Australian, right? So we're going to have two kinds of sentences that have subjects and predicates. Singular sentences, like Dan is Australian, defined as sentences that contain a name. Think of them as sentences where the subject is an individual, right? That which is named by the name, right? So that's going to be one of our two kinds of subject-predicate sentence, and categorical propositions, what we will be discussing in Unit 12, in this unit, are the other type of subject-predicate sentence, okay? Singular sentences have an individual for their subject, and please grasp that we are talking about very different kinds of beings, different kind of linguistic beings. Singular sentences, you're predicating something of an individual. What is a categorical proposition? A categorical proposition is a proposition where the subject, as well as the predicate, is an entire class, right? The subject and predicate are both classes, and the categorical proposition asserts an inclusion or exclusion relation between these two classes. All right, so that's what a categorical proposition is. We'll elaborate on that more in a moment. Just to continue bringing us up to where we are, we've got those two kinds. We've got two kinds of sentences. Two kinds of subject-predicate sentences. Singular sentences, subject is an individual. Categorical sentences, subject is an entire class. But also remember, after Unit 10, in Unit 11, we were introduced to sentences which do not have subjects, right? You can have sentences, that is, what is a sentence for us? Always something capable of being true or false. You can have sentences, things that are capable of being true or false, that don't have subjects, and those were simple quantified sentences, right? So we were introduced in Unit 11, the title was quantifiers, we introduced to quantifiers, and we learned the other way of completing a sentence from the incomplete propositional function, right? So we have AX down as Australian, but consider another propositional function, fx, means x will fail, right? I don't think I have a bill in the class, so if I replace the individual variable x with b for bill, fb, that'll be one way of making a sentence from a propositional function, right? Uppercase f, lowercase b, that would say bill will fail, which is a claim which is either true or false, right? But there's another way we learned to make sentences from propositional functions, and that is by annexing the quantifier to the propositional function. And what we get is a sentence that is not a sentence with a subject, right? This is something complete in itself. Propositional function, as we've stressed, not complete, right? Not themselves capable of being true or false. If I say X is Australian, you don't argue with people over that because you haven't said something complete, right? But here's two simple quantified statements to illustrate how we have this other type of sentence, right? Sentences which are formed by annexing a quantifier or prefixing a quantifier to a propositional function. Fx, x will fail. This is the existential quantifier. It says there exists an x such that, so we read this sentence as there exists an x such that x will fail. More colloquially, at least one of you will fail, right? Someone will fail this course. Okay, so that's a simple quantified sentence. Here's another one with the universal quantifier, though I made this one a little happier. Let's have px, x will pass the course, right? Px, x will pass. So what does this say? This is the universal quantifier. What a quantifier is, they tell you of how many things a propositional function is true. The existential quantifier says that the propositional function is true of at least one thing. The universal quantifier tells you that the propositional function is true of all things in the universe. So what does this say? This says, for all x, x will pass the course, or everyone will pass. Strictly, everything will pass, right? Pretty sure that's going to be false. That's going to be true. But they're sentences, right? Okay, so you've got three types of three ways of forming sentences, right? Two of which are subject-predicate sentences. Two ways of forming sentences have subjects. Singular sentences, where the subject is an individual. Categorical sentence, where the subject is a class. That is the topic of Unit 12. And this other way, which don't have subjects, right? Simple quantified sentences, which are formed by conjoining quantifiers with propositional functions. Right.